That'll work.
Yeah, I like it. I like the mountains.
Thank you.
Where are you
Thank,
located?
I live in Atascadero, California.
Okay, wonderful.
That is actually Bend, Oregon, though.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just got off a trip in Colorado, so I'm in mountain. I mean, I'm in Kansas City, so I'm landlocked. We don't have all. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah,
There
cool.
you
Right on. Well, hey man, it's great to meet you. And before we get into your life and your work, what I would like to do is kind of cover COVID. The last 3 years has been kind of a strange time for everyone. How did you get through that time period and how has it changed you?
Oh man, it changed me in a couple of ways. Uh, Actually, let me move my microphone over here. So we're already in it. So that's a really great question. It started out for me. I had just been on a cycling trip with some people I coach in Colombia and landed. Like we were hearing about this COVID thing while we were in Colombia, and then landed in LAX, and everyone was masked up, and it was just bizarre. It was just bizarre. And a couple weeks later, California was shut down. And I initially responded to it from kind of a coaching standpoint, and I was hosting some Zoom sessions for people to come in and do some group connection and some group work and interact together, and I was hosting some Zoom workouts for a while, and I kind of threw myself at it, but I ended up just kind of giving too much of myself. I was just giving away a lot. And to me, I ultimately at the time had a slip in my sobriety and had to really have a second surrender in my sobriety. And that was probably a year or so in. And I'd just been kind of giving and overdoing it and losing sight of kind of my own well-being. And it just at that point it cracked me. It just cracked me, and it took a couple of years of really concentrated work and concentrated self-reflection to rebuild some self-awareness and get clarity on really what it was I wanted my life to be. So yeah, the pandemic, it started out really interesting, and I was really engaged, and my coaching business was going through a transition at that point. And I think, the pandemic uh, basically accelerated what that transition was supposed to be, and it put it in a crucible at the time. And so I ended up having to do a lot of personal work and personal growth work during that time. And I'm grateful for it, and it was definitely a challenge. What did you do?
Oh, I got out and in Kansas City, there's a lot of places to go to see nature and just traverse and just get out of the house. So it was good. That was kind of the name of the game, you know.
Yeah.
So it was good. Um, so I want to get to the crux of what you do for a living, and I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day. One of the kids looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
That's that's the hardest question I've ever had. uh, there are a lot of ways to answer that, but let's just say I coach people who are in business,
Okay.
and my job is to help them through challenging transitions, in whether it's their personal lives or their businesses. I help them through challenging transitions. So for some people, I help them do better. I help them grow. And for others, actually, I help everyone grow, but some people are leveling up and some people were leveling out, depending upon where they are in their career and where they are in that transition. Is that third
So
grader enough?
yeah, that's 100%. So when you were in the third grade, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I probably wanted to be a baseball player when I was a third grader,
Yeah.
except I don't think I really had the talent for it.
Right.
I got in the third grade. What were we doing? My family might have even been in a move from California to Arizona at the time. So I was probably just figuring out who was going to be my friend.
Yeah.
I don't even think I had the wherewithal to think that far ahead of what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you've had quite an interesting professional life, and I'm curious, what were the seeds that were planted into you when you were younger? I mean, you love the stories, getting the stories out. You've worked for some pretty big names. How did all this begin for you, and how did these seeds become who you are today?
It's funny you bring that up. I sort of had just a flash on that the other day, and then I lost it, and then I lost the flash. So I think, as a kid, I was probably something of a storyteller. I recently got some of my childhood junk back. And somewhere in there was like this book I had written as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Probably about a cat or something, or playing baseball or whatever. And I think I had always had an interest in stories. And I was definitely a big reader as a kid and a big reader as a high schooler, lousy student, an absolutely lousy high school student, but I had had a great vocabulary, and I was a terrible test taker, and a terrible, at the time, not a great writer. But I read a lot, and I always loved I always loved stories. And I think even well before I knew it, well before I could internalize it, I think that I understood that stories had power, and that humans have been telling stories for their whole lives, which through all of our history. We've told stories, whether it's on the inside of paintings on the inside of caves, or things that you do around campfires. Stories are really what touch people and bring them together. And I suppose that's probably what drew me to, at the time I was in college, to be a history major. I never The kind of history that I did in as an undergrad and a graduate student never really had to do with dates and and facts. It always had to do with narratives and larger cultural themes. I was always like, I could never get the dates right, but I could always get kind of like what was going on, what were the cultural currents and the stories of those currents within the historical moments. That was what always resonated with me. And interestingly, I thought at one point I was going to be a history professor, and then, as you've alluded to, my own personal career history has kind of zigged and zagged. But in some ways, where I am today in how I work with people, I spend a fair bit of time looking at exactly what their oral history is. What are the stories that they're telling themselves? And so, in many ways, I've come right back to that, because our stories have both the power to heal, but they also have the great power to just impede us in the story and what we're telling ourselves and how we're telling those narratives. And
So,
so as a coach, I think about, like, how do I move the energy of that story around to be a bit more beneficial for wherever someone is today.
that's fascinating. So, any good story that we have out there has to have a hero. Who's been your hero?
I don't have a single hero. It always that's I draw a blank when you ask that. Um, Let me just look over at my bookshelf here and see who's interesting to me at the moment, if we'll do that.
Yeah, let's do it.
I love Russell Brand's work lately. I wouldn't call Russell Brand a hero, but I think that, he's got such a fascinating story that's great. And he does a beautiful job of pulling stories out of other people. So if y'all don't know Russell Brand, he's the comedian. And I love stories about overcoming. I love stories about people accomplishing things that they might have thought impossible. I think Viktor Frankl's story, Man's Search for Meaning, is fascinating. I mean, I've heard a lot of great stories in my life, and certainly a big part of my early career was working with Holocaust survivors. And, that was 25 years ago. So I can't remember specific people by name anymore, but it's often really hard to top stories like that, right? to have someone telling you this profound thing from this deeply troubling moment in their lives, and how they turn that into whatever the energy was for the rest of their life. So, honestly, it's really hard to beat those kinds of stories, and I wish I had done them a better service of remembering them by name, but it's a long time ago.
Yeah, sure. So you may have already answered this question, but if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now and spend some time with them, who would it be?
If I could meet anyone alive, let's come back to that. I'm going to think about
Okay,
that one. I'm going to come back to that
sure.
one.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
I'm so lucky that I get to have a lot of great conversations each day. So I
Yeah.
don't know, sort of, that aspirational stuff is pretty marvelous. Who do I want to meet? Who would I love to sit down and have coffee with? I actually think I don't necessarily go in for his politics, but I would love to have a conversation with Jordan Peterson.
Okay,
I'd
cool.
love to have a conversation with Gabor Mate. Those guys would be really phenomenal for me. I think
Yeah.
just super interesting, powerful, philosophical conversations.
So all of the work that you do every day you wake up, you have this motivating force in you. What is the fuel in your tank? What is it that drives you through the day to accomplish what you want to get done?
I think it's more of an inspiring force for me, right? I think motivation comes from the external, inspirational comes from the internal. And every single day, I get to have great conversations, and I get to hear where people are at. And people, I'm very fortunate, and for whatever reason, people are willing to go deep and share with me, and I think that's a real privilege to be able to hear where they are. But I mean, I think overall the big motivating thing for me each morning, the inspiring thing is, I also sit down and have a conversation with the universe every morning and just say, what's your will for me today, and how can I be of maximal service?
Right on.
And so if I can be of service to someone by hearing their story and maybe giving them a useful perspective, great. That's marvelous. That's if it would be something that I if I could afford to do it, I would do it for free.
Nice. So what are you the proudest of? What story, what client success story have you had that always puts a smile on your face?
There's one recently of someone that I've worked with who will just I have a few really good ones actually. One, let's do one that I just wrote about the other day was, I when I was coaching executive cyclists a bit more before I started just focusing on just the inner work. I had a cyclist who had changed their life. They had changed their weight. They had changed their whole body composition. They had changed their skills as a rider. And they wanted to go, they were going to race the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, which is one of the most iconic and challenging mountain bike races in the world. And so we were there for the event, and I was there to support that person. And so, there in the morning, everyone lines up, thousands of riders lining up at like 11,000 feet in Leadville, Colorado. It's dark. We're joking. We're talking through this person's what they're going to do for the day and how they want to approach it. And I'm reminding them, start slower than you think. It's a long day. Start slower than you think. And I was so they took off, and saw them in the middle of the sort of early on, maybe 40 miles in, and they had come tearing into our aid station. We fed them. They went up and did the huge Mount Columbine climb, but then the descent is almost as challenging as the climb itself. It will take as much energy out. They came back like just looking wrecked, but they still have probably a good 50 miles to go. So they go off, and we get a call at one point. I'm in the medic tent. I'm throwing in the towel. Like, hold on, what? Why are you doing that? And they said, oh, I can't get any power in my legs. And I knew that, if they stayed in the medic tent for too long, they were going to get disqualified. So just get on your bike and go. Just get on your, we'll meet you. Just get on your bike and go. But I don't have any, I don't care. Just go. So we catch up to them. We're driving along with them, and they're getting pissed off that we're that we're like, just leave me alone, go away. I want to die. I want to die in the woods by myself.
Yeah.
So they go. We let them go, and then we try to meet them on another part of the course. And I've lost them on the tracker app. I had the app. I'm tracking. I can't find them. So finally, their partner and I go back to Leadville to the finish line. I'm like, where's my athlete? Where's my athlete? Where's my? No one can figure out where my athlete is. And just as we're about to get in the car and drive around the course and see if we can't find the rider, I hear their name called, and so I run back to the finish line, and they're just covered in dirt and muck, and it's like in their teeth and their ears, and it looks like, have you ever watch Lawrence of Arabia?
Oh yeah.
You remember when he comes out of the desert after he's gone in to save someone,
Uh-huh.
and comes back and goes, "Nothing is written."
Yeah.
So I see this athlete, and they're just knackered. Their bike is on the ground, and they look over at me and go, "Thank you for not letting me give up." That was probably one of the best moments as a coach it can have, because it wasn't just about the physical side, it was about the mental side, and it was about how do we show up for people in our lives and get them through what feels like the impossible moment. And obviously, a mountain bike race is an indulgence, and I understand it's a privilege, but at the same time, it was a spiritual test for this person. And so to be able to witness that, that I think is a huge inspiration for me.
So of all of the things that you've seen and you've done, you gain wisdom by going through them. If you were to have a dream tonight, you ran into a 20-year-old version of yourself, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've lived, the wisdom you've gained, what would you tell that younger version of you?
Go get sober. That's what I would have told myself. Go get sober.
Yeah.
Go do the work. Go do the inner work. Do it now. Do it now and start that journey now. That's pretty clearly, I think, what I would start that path. You'll learn more about yourself than you ever thought possible.
So speaking of learning and, revelations, those kinds of things, what was the first book that you read when you were younger that really opened up the curtains or just made you want to read more or be better?
The first book, I don't remember. I mean, I remember reading pretty early on the Lord of the Rings series, being pretty young and reading that. That was a pretty powerful experience. I don't remember how old I was. In some ways, I remember the first albums that I bought more, and the storytelling in those albums. And I remember I was like 10 or 11 years old, and the first albums I bought were at the same time was Beach Boys, Pet Sounds, and The Clash, London Calling at the same time. And both of them for me were like, what?
Yeah, of
What?
course.
What's going on here?
Yeah.
So I probably take as much from storytelling in songs as I even do from books and how I hear those things.
So, Bryan, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you're in control of your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I don't know who I am. I know I'm working on who I'm becoming. That's the thing that I'm really curious about, right? And I take it one day at a time. And I think, today I try to be someone. I can tell you who I try to be. I try to show up with as much humility and curiosity and openness as I possibly can. And that means, whenever I'm working with someone or talking with someone, I try to leave as much of my narrative out of it as possible and listen with the intention to understand.
So, of all of the stories that you've read, what's one of the greatest human events that you would have loved to have seen firsthand?
Any number of Tours de France would have been marvelous. I mean, I think the most powerful stuff I've read has been the things from has been reading about people's experiences from the Holocaust, and there's no way I would have wanted to be there. That's not a part of, but I think um, to be able to learn about that and to learn about it from people who were there firsthand has been a profound shaper of my life.
Yeah. So, Brian, if anyone out there wants to learn more about you, hire you, anything pertaining to your world, where can they go?
They can go to locomotivecoaching.com. There's no E in locomotive. It's just it almost looks like it's some sort of Soviet realist spelling. So locomotivecoaching.com, no E. You can also look me up with Bryan with a Y Yates coaching, and you should be able to find me. I'm also pretty available on LinkedIn. I tend to do a lot of writing there, so you can find my posting and what I'm thinking about on LinkedIn. You can go to locomotive_coaching on Instagram. That's another place to find me, although I haven't been using it quite as much. Um, and yeah, those are the places to find me.
Cool. Brian, this has been great, man. Thank you for opening up. Thanks for your story. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate your time. Thanks for
Absolutely.
inviting me on.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Take care, you too.
See you later.